Hey everyone, Edward O'Daniel here, and welcome to Tenant Screening by theveteranlandlord.com. Hey, I appreciate you guys hopping in on the call here, and we're going to be going over tenant screening. This is extremely important when it comes to landlording. Tenant screening is going to be one of the ways that you can absolutely save yourself lots of time, energy, and effort by properly screening and knowing who you're going to put into your units before you actually put somebody in there. So let's go ahead and kind of get started here on the agenda. I'm going to be breaking down tenant screening, the difference between when people say tenant screening versus qualifications. Those are kind of two different things, and I'll explain those two. We're also going to cover a little bit of fair housing. I think it'd be right to go through tenant screening and qualifications without throwing a little bit of fair housing in this, just so that you can understand. It's important to know what to ask, but it's also very important to know what not to ask, because there are certain questions that you don't want to ask that could get you into trouble. Okay, from discrimination, from fair housing, and then there are certain things that you're just not allowed to ask people. Not to say that they wouldn't volunteer that information. You as a landlord just cannot ask them outright. So, and one other thing I want to cover is steering. That's going to be something important, and that does have to deal with fair housing, but more particularly, I want to make sure that I see a lot of beginning landlords fail at this point. They use steering and they don't know it, and that can get you into trouble as well. So, tenant screening. When first of all, let me just kind of state this: when you're screening tenants, if you're going to do this yourself, which I do not recommend that you do, my personal recommendation is to always just outsource this entire thing to a third-party company. So that's where I stand at flat out, because this is a huge amount of time that could be, depending on how many applications you get in. So let me just kind of go through this little notice real quick. But when you're screening tenants, I'd much rather use a third-party provider. You could simply Google like tenant screening your local city. Like I'm from St. Louis, tenant screening St. Louis. So those are the type of things that you could find local tenant screening companies. There are also national screening companies that you can use, and there's also organizations, different systems you can use, and they're actually outside of this training. If you look at the Veteran Landlord site, I put some references up there for you to use as well on this particular training site. But if you do want to do the tenant screening yourself, and if you do not want to use a third-party provider, it's always nice to know some tenant screening questions, because these are the questions that you need to kind of get familiar with your tenant, so that you know who's going into one of your properties and the type of person that they are. So getting into them, again, what date would you like to move in? Pretty simple. When you're talking to people over the phone, you do want to find out when they're looking to move in, because if your unit is available immediately, then you don't want that person to move in 3 months later. Do you know what I mean? So that's something that you don't want to hold your unit for 3 months and lose a couple of months rent just because they're looking to move in later. That might not be a good fit. So understanding when they're looking to move in, and if your unit is not ready, for instance, it may still have tenants living in there that may not be out by a certain time, or if you live in an area of the country where occupancy inspections are required, meaning there's sort of a inspection they have to go through and verify that your home's in good shape before you're allowed to move a renter in there. Those things take time, energy, and effort. So just being able to coordinate when your unit will be ready to when the person wants to move in is always a good thing. So that's an important question. How many people will be occupying the home? Okay, so this right here is a very good way of asking this question. You're not asking how many kids do you have. You're not asking anything like that, because you could be violating one of the protected classes in fair housing, which we'll get to, but called familial status. But you don't want to necessarily ask how many children do you have, how old they are, things like that. But how many people will be occupying the home is absolutely something that you can ask, because a lot of times you want to make sure that people don't overcrowd a property. Meaning, if you have a one-bedroom apartment, you don't want 4 people living there. You don't want a mother, father, and then 2 kids to be living there, regardless of what it is, or even mother, father, and their mother and father. You just don't want that many people living in such a small place. And your local municipality, your city, possibly even your state, may have rules regarding how many people can live in a certain amount of space that you have in your particular unit or home. So how many people will be occupying the home is important, because typically for 1 bedrooms, you're looking at about 2 people. For a 2 bedroom, you're looking roughly, depending on the size of the room, 4 to 5 people. 3 bedrooms goes up to more along the 5 to 7 range of people that can live into a 3 bedroom, and then it goes up from there. And again, all of these depending upon how big the room sizes are. There are certain types of rules regarding that. But if you have a 2 bedroom and maybe your particular city only allows 4 people, then you want to make sure that you don't talk to somebody looking to move 5 people in, regardless of who they are, whether they're adults, whether they're minor children. You don't too much care. You just want to make sure that you abide by the occupancy rules. So again, how many people will be occupying the home? That's a good question to ask. Now, what is your total monthly income? That's going to be a good one, because you want to make sure that they are able to afford the property or the home or the apartment that you're living in. For instance, if you have a 1-bedroom apartment and you're renting it for, I'm just going to say $500 a month. Now, please, some people in the country, don't laugh at me on that. I know you're kind of thinking like, man, I wish I can get a 1-bedroom for $500. If you're in New York, I understand you're not going to get something that cheap, for instance. But I'm just trying to, for the sake of this presentation, if your 1-bedroom apartment is $500 a month and somebody only makes $600 a month, then obviously that person is not going to be a good fit. They cannot possibly pay $500 in rent and live off of $100 a month. That's just not going to physically be capable. So we're going to talk about the income requirements more and qualifications. But for right now, understanding their total monthly income are ways that you can potentially eliminate people from being a tenant. Again, when you're asking these tenant screening questions, a lot of things that you could think about is you're just trying to get them to say something that will disqualify them from the property. Now, you're not trying to be mean when you do that, but you want to find out if this person is going to be a solid fit for your unit. And by asking these questions based upon the qualifications, which we'll go over in a little bit, this person may not be a good fit. So you want to get to that person, you want to eliminate them as quickly as possible by asking these questions. So if they don't make enough money for their income, how many years have you worked at your job? Again, if somebody just worked there for 2 or 3 months, that job may be unstable. It could be, depending on the state, it could be a right to hire state, where people can be let go at any given time. So, just working there for a few months versus if they said, well, I've been working at my job for 8 years, well, then that money that they're making is pretty stable and they've been at their job for a while. So that might give you a little bit more security there. How much are you currently paying for your rent? Or how much are you paying for your rent currently? This is important because if you're renting something for, say, $1,000 and somebody's coming from, like they were, for instance, doing roommates, and they had a roommate and they were only paying $400 or $450, for instance, for their apartment, going from $400 to $450 to $1,000 is quite a shift. Now, they could make enough money, but the question you have to ask yourself here is, are they going to be able to adjust their lifestyle, their style of living, to accommodate roughly a doubling of their rent that they paid each month, even if they make the right amount of money? Because people will spend all the money pretty much that they make. So if they get a raise and they make more money, they end up spending that money in some way, shape, or form, whether it be a car or credit cards or something. So you just want to make sure that the change in rent is not dramatic like that. If your place is $1,000, you'd like for the place you're coming from to be, potentially even more. So they might be downsizing, but more or at least the same amount, because that's going to keep them in the same lifestyle that they're used to living currently, if that makes sense. Now, the next question, do you have any pets? This is very important here because this kind of goes back to some qualifications. Do you have a pet policy? And we'll kind of cover that. But if they have pets, if so, what kind of pets do they have and how many? Now, one of the things I want to mention here is when you're screening for these particular type of pets here, depending on where you're at here, you could have a pet-friendly place or not a pet-friendly place. So if I guess what I'm trying to say here is, depending on what this is, if it's an apartment or if it's a home, your insurance may not allow certain types of animals to be in the particular property. So I would say check with your insurance company that insures your property to make sure that you're not violating any of their pet rules. I know for most nationwide companies, for instance, aggressive breed dogs are not really allowed. And when I say allowed, meaning that your insurance company, if they find out you're renting to somebody who has like a pit bull or a German Shepherd or a Doberman Pinscher or a Rottweiler. These are considered to be aggressive breed dogs. Now, I'm an animal lover myself. I mean, I think these dogs can be incredibly, family friendly. However, insurance companies do not see it that way. Insurance companies just see how strong and aggressive that animal can be, and could your pit bull, for instance, rip an arm off a little kid if they're playing in the backyard? And then what's the liability of the insurance company if that happens? So I'm just trying to give you a premise of just making sure that when you have pets, understanding what type of pets, obviously if they have a St. Bernard, those things are rather large. Those dogs will cause damage. They make a lot of noise when they run. So these are all things that I want you to keep in mind when you're allowing for pets. Now, that's different than if somebody has a goldfish. Obviously a goldfish is not going to be a huge deal, but if you have a larger building, for instance, and there are multiple levels, well, you might not want a person with 100-gallon fish tank, to move in up on the third floor of your building, because what happens if that thing breaks? You got 100 gallons of water that now hit the floor, that now has no place to go except gravity to pull it down. And that's going to damage your property. So those are the things I want you to kind of think about when it comes to tenant screening questions. And how many pets. So moving on, why are you looking to move? That's always a good question to ask, because you're looking for their motivation. Why are you looking to move? So typically, my experience, people only move for a very few couple reasons. They're relocating from a different city, and moving for a job. They are outgrown the place, or they are shrinking and downsizing. So it could be you get somebody who, they have a larger unit, or somebody's about ready to have another baby and they need from a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom. They might be looking to move, things like that. But understanding their motivation is important, because that right there will lead to, you don't want somebody causing a problem in one building to leave. Because if you obviously get, why are you looking to move? Well, I'm looking to move because my landlord keeps saying I can't have parties at 12 o'clock at night, or 12 to 1 o'clock in the morning here. And wherever I go, I need to be able to party that late, and that's just my lifestyle. Well, that might be very important for you to know before you move somebody like that in. So that's just the motivation of that particular person. You need to understand that. Now, does your current landlord know you're moving? Again, another good one. Now, the reason I ask that you ask this question is because you want to find out, are you letting does the tenant communicate with the landlord about them moving? Because if they are not letting their current landlord know they're moving, then most likely they will not let you know when they're moving, when they move into your unit. So that's just, again, if having somebody has good communication is always important. Again, have you ever been evicted? That's good to know. Have you ever broken a lease in the past? Meaning, what happened, and just trying to get an idea here. Have you moved out before your lease was up? Have you had other lease problems? Because again, you don't want somebody with a constant problem, or who've had problems with breaking leases in the past, to move into your unit. Because if they've done it before, they may very well do it again, and then you don't want that to be your headache. So, how long were you living in your current home? So you want to find out, or did you just move in a year ago? If so, where did you live before that? You might want to ask them, well, why do you move every year? If you find out they've been moving year by year, you might be looking for a longer term tenant that's going to stay there for multiple years, because in the renting business, your cash flow really comes from renewals, people staying in your unit year after year, so you don't have to turn that unit every year. You don't have vacancy costs and things like that. So understanding how long you're living in your current home is important. If they say that we've lived here for 10 years, but the person who has the property is selling it and we have to move, I love hearing stuff like that. I do, that they're selling the home and the person's looking to move, because as long as they're a good fit with all the other questions and some of the qualifications, then you're potentially looking at a long-term renter that's going to be in there, and that just means more money for you as a landlord. Okay. And again, are you currently in bankruptcy? So this is sort of the last question I ask is, you want to be careful when you have tenants who file for bankruptcy. This is really an open-ended question, and I could probably have a whole other sort of lesson on just bankruptcy. But please understand, if somebody is in bankruptcy, and I'm going to take a few minutes just to explain this. If they're in bankruptcy, you want to make sure that their bankruptcy has been settled, meaning that they're currently not open to any debtors. What you don't want to have is you don't want to have somebody who moves from where they're currently at right now into your unit while they're beginning bankruptcy, because what can happen is that they can then list you as a creditor against their bankruptcy, and then that can make it a lot more difficult to impossible to get rid of them quickly, if that makes sense. So just be very cautious with bankruptcy. Look up the bankruptcy laws in your state where you're from, but just be careful of that. Right now, if people have already been through bankruptcy, those people, in my opinion, are not bad because their debts for the most part have been wiped out, and now they're kind of starting all over again. But if people are currently in bankruptcy, that's kind of one of the things to make sure that you watch out for. So moving on from tenant screening questions, hopefully you guys got those to more of the qualifications. So tenant screening is when you're actually talking to people and you're interviewing them almost on the phone. Now, one of the things, let me pop back here. One of the things I didn't put on here for tenant screening questions is to literally ask the tenant, do you have any questions for me? Because you might not have, they might have questions or about how things work. So if you ever ask that question, that's often good because then you get people asking you stuff that maybe you haven't told them or asked them already. So you can add a few more questions here. If you get some good questions for people, then you might want to add those questions to these existing questions to ask people in the future, just so that you cover everything. But again, asking somebody if they have any questions for you is always a good thing. So qualifications. Now, qualifications are what you're going to use to screen people out before you even get them to asking about tenant qualification or tenant screening questions. So pretty much when you do your marketing, your advertising for your property, I like to put the qualifications up directly in the ad. And if not, at least have a link to a website that has the qualifications on it that you can put in the ad. So you can have in your marketing ad for your property, for qualifications for renting, please view them here at this link. Click here. Or just simply have all of your qualifications that we're going to talk about, and you can just copy and paste them directly into your ad. It does make your ad a bit longer, but it gives them all their information they're looking to know. So basically the qualifications are this is what you must have in order to qualify to rent a place that we have. So again, this is going to be your pre-screen. If you start marketing out there, and if you don't have our marketing book, go check it out, How to Rent Your Property in 8 Days. It's in the Veteran Landlord member area. It's a very good tool for how to build systems, and we cover marketing and how to do marketing in that particular ebook. But if you're doing online marketing, you're going to be getting potentially lots and lots of leads from 5 to 10 a day to even 20 to 50 a day, depending upon your market. You could get a lot of them depending on where your property is, how about, the location of the property, how many people can live in there, and things like that. So qualifications are important to put in there because I don't want to see you spend so much time answering phone calls or emails from people of just time wasters. People asking you, well, what are your qualifications? Well, you don't qualify for this particular unit. Did you not see our qualifications in our ad? So you want to make sure you put all that stuff out there so people can, in a sense, pre-screen themselves out before they even call you. Because if they don't meet these qualifications, you just don't want them to apply, period. So now the qualifications here, I'm going to talk about these, but these are ultimately your decision to make. As a landlord, you need to come up and absolutely have a document or something that's within your company, yourself, that these are your qualifications. Now, if you do a third-party tenant screening provider, they will have their own qualifications. So you don't need to come up with these if you're using a third party. It's easy as this. If you're using a third-party provider, you can go to their website or request what their qualifications are, because they will have a list of these qualifications themselves, and then you can simply use their qualifications when posting your ads. Okay? And then you'll have a link somewhere in your ad that says, click here to go to their website and fill out an application for your unit. Okay? That's why I recommend this, because it's such a time saver. Use their resources. Use that third-party tenant screening resource to to screen the tenants and the process the leads and to fill out the applications online. And that way it just saves you a lot of time. And then you just get notified by email, text, or whatever that, hey, you just got a new application in today. Hey, somebody else just applied for your unit. Hey, somebody else just applied. And then the tenant will have to pay the third party provider directly. That you don't meet with them and collect any money. You don't have to do any of that if you use a third party provider. But if you do the tenant screening yourself, there are going to be tools that you actually use to do tenant screening, and these are going to require that you pay for background checks, criminal checks, the national eviction database checks and things like that. Those are all going to cost you individual amounts of money. So you want to make sure that you get money from them to pay for the application fee up front so that you can cover your costs. So having said that, I'm all about just kind of sharing with this. I want to make sure that you guys have a good amount of information, but if you're going to do it yourself here, your qualifications are absolutely a must that you have to come up with. So here's some of them, the big ones that I think you should have on your list. Number one, how much should tenants make each month to afford the property? So this is important. Typically, as a national standard, I've always seen 3 times the monthly rent at least. So again, if you're renting a place for $1,000, they would need to make at least $3,000, total as a family in order to qualify for that particular unit. Now, one of the things, I think we're going to get there in just a minute here, but when it comes to sources of income, you also need to look at that because that can be a pain to you as well. We're going to cover that here shortly. But do you require a certain credit score? That's another good one. These are questions that you get all the time from people that call you because they want to know what your qualifications are before they spend money on an application fee. They want to make sure that they can pre-screen themselves out. And if you have all this on their site, then they will look at this and they will not apply if they don't meet these standards because they know they'd pretty much be wasting their money. So do you require a certain credit score? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. That's going to be up for you to decide. So depending on what area you live in, but the biggest thing that I want you to understand is when you come up with these qualifications, you absolutely, please put a little star next to your notes if you're writing some stuff down. You absolutely have to apply the exact same qualifications to everyone who applies for your unit. Okay, you can't give a 20-year-old kid something different than a 60-year-old grandpa who's applying for a 1-bedroom. These people, even though they're older, they cannot have different qualifications. Everybody has to process and be a part of the same qualifications in order to get processed. Because if you don't, you could be showing favoritism to an older person or younger person and in turn get yourself into trouble. So please have your qualifications. This is what they are. If you don't meet them, then you cannot rent from us. So please do that. Now, employment history. How many years on the job? Sometimes if you have people who just start the job, typically if you just started a job and you've been there less than a year, you might be a little bit more risky with, risky because you haven't worked at the place very long versus if you've worked someplace for 15 years, then you're pretty stable. So, what is the amount of years on your job and how do you handle those situations where somebody are below that? Okay, because depending upon your state, you might require a larger deposit. For instance, I let people know I'm in the St. Louis, Missouri area, and in Missouri, we're allowed to charge 2 times the monthly rent as a security deposit. That is just our state rules. There are a lot of states that do not have a limit on the security deposit. So literally, you can charge them whatever you want to for the deposit if they're a higher risk. And that could be a part of your qualifications. You have to have at least a 700 credit score or higher. And if you don't have a 700 credit score, well, then you need to put down at least a double or triple security deposit because you would be higher risk. You could do that, but you may limit your people who could afford to do that. Please note. Okay, that's certainly within your rules as long as you maintain those rules for everybody. So how many years on the job? That's important. Come up with that. Criminal history. Now, typically, how many years on the job? If somebody's been on the job, at least a year, they've at least worked there a year. They're not like in transit. Some people can work for a job for 3 or 4 or 5 months, not like it, quit and move to another job. So I kind of tend to look at anybody less than a year being, higher risk. Sometimes I know a lot of people are less than 3 years, would be a higher risk to them. So that's going to be up to you to come up with your policy and determine that. Criminal history. Do you have a policy? Do you accept felons? Do you accept sex offenders? If they come up on the sex offender database. This is one of those things that I will go into this with criminal history. HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Office, has come up with certain policies that strictly says that you kind of get in trouble if you put on your website, we do not accept felons. If you literally have that on your website here, then HUD is breaking down or cracking down on people that do that directly on their website. So I would have a policy in there, and really the verbiage is, I would kind of search what some of the other people are doing with their verbiage, but have a policy that just kind of specifies that, you just kind of say it's, you play it by ear. It's a case by case basis, if that means. But me, myself, we do not accept anybody that has violent felons. If you've been convicted of a violent felony, in the past 10 years, then we're not interested. We're not. Violent felons are a problem. Now, if it's, obviously if it's a white collar crime, I'm not here to debate the, what's worse, felony is a felony. But ultimately, if you are a violent felon, then you have violent tendencies, and especially that could be a danger to yourself because they've proven to be violent, at least in the past, and they may cause damage to the property or threaten other people if it's a multifamily building. So you just need to keep the safety of the entire community in mind when you're thinking about this. So do you have a policy on criminal history? So again, you need to come up with this, or you can simply let the third-party provider's qualifications run, and if they deny them, if the third party denies them, then you're not responsible for replying back to them. You can just simply let them know based upon the third-party provider why they denied you. You see what I mean? So it kind of gives you some, you can place the blame on them, and it's up to them to follow fair housing rules and things like that. That's why I recommend doing that so much, because it reduces the strain and stress from the landlord, and it puts more of the responsibility on the third party. Eviction history, going back to qualifications. What if the person's been evicted before? Then what? So do you accept evictions? And if the eviction happened 10 years ago and they've had good rental history since then, is that okay? So coming up with that policy is important. Now, obviously, if somebody's currently in eviction right now, I would have to say you should absolutely say no. I mean, if they're being evicted from their current place, why would you want to put somebody in your home if they're currently being evicted from the home that they're in? They're being evicted for a reason. So you don't want somebody else's problems to be your problem. So next is rental history. How many landlord references do you require? Now, if you don't know, it may not always be a good thing to get just one landlord reference from where they're currently at. And, you may want to get two of them, because here's the reason. If you call their existing current landlord, that landlord may not be ethical. They may not be scrupulous. They could tell you whatever you want to hear. Yes, the person's terrific. They pay on time every month. I wish they could stay another 20 years. They were an excellent tenant. They could tell you all of that, and, no, they were never late. They could tell you all of that, even though it is absolute fabrication. But what they're doing is they're just trying to make them look good, the tenants, make them look good to you so that you will allow them into your unit, and then they can get them out of theirs. So they're really just looking to get rid of that particular tenant, and the best way they can do that is to give you a great reference. Now, if you do two landlord references, if you go back to the previous landlord that they've had before their current, then that person has no reason to lie to you. So that's why it's always a good idea to do two. The person prior to them would have no reason to lie. If they were late, if they were not a good tenant, they will definitely let you know. So this is where I would say at least try to get two landlord references. Now, obviously, if the person has been renting someplace for 10 years and, or whatever, something crazy like that, then, getting their previous landlord may not be very good, because they may not remember that person or may not have any records of that person from 10 or 11 years ago. So, but you can always try. This goes back to how much money you'll make, that very first question here. And sorry, these qualifications are in no particular order, guys. So it's just, these are just some of the things that popped up. Maybe I should organize these a little bit better. But how many sources of income will you accept? Now, I say this because if you're renting a place for $1,000 a month and you have a rule, roughly, let's just say that you require at least 3 times the monthly rent. Well, what if they're getting that 3 times a monthly rent from 5 different income sources? So they have two jobs, they're getting child support, they're getting a pension, and they're getting, I don't know, they're getting some other form of assistance from some other party. This comes into play because if they're getting money from multiple different sources, what's going to happen? Would they still qualify for that 3x times the monthly rent if one of those sources were to go away? Do you see what I mean? So you want to look at that as far as the big picture, because obviously if they have a job, they've been working there for 10 years, they make enough money at their job alone, then you don't really even need to count these other sources of income. Their job is good enough, and they're going to have their job. But what happens if they get let go from their second job? And what happens if the child support doesn't come in for a couple of months and then they start falling behind? Well, then they fall under your minimum monthly quota, and that can start having issues with them paying the rent. So, how many sources of income? Just think about that. You want to typically just have at most, one or two sources, because if one of those sources were to fail, it could cause problems. So, again, do you allow pets? If so, how many and what kind? Again, that's going to be part of your qualifications. If you do not allow pets, then you should simply put no pets allowed in your marketing. Absolutely. And then anybody with a pet will not bother to call you because they know what your pet policy is. But if you do have pets, again, you want to sit back and make sure that you put in there what pets are allowed and how many they're allowed to have. If there's a limit, what type they're allowed to have, and things like that. So, pets are allowed, up to 2 pets. Cats and dogs allowed up to 50 pounds per animal. And I would also put in there with your pets, I would also make sure I put in there any of your pet fees and your pet deposits. That's a good one for the qualification. So they know right up front that if you do allow for 2 dogs or 2 cats, for instance, in this example, that you will charge an extra, $50 a month per pet per month in rent, that person has to pay for that. And then there is an X amount, say $250 per pet, non-refundable pet deposit. Because believe it or not, regardless of what type of pets will cause damage to your units. Even if you just look at the hair factor. Okay, a lot of people don't think about this, but when you have pets, a lot of people are allergic to the animals based upon the dander and the stuff they have on their hair, or things like that. So if their hair, for instance, you could clean that up off the floor, but what if that goes into the vents of the building? What if the hair falls into the vents, and then when you get a new tenant, these new tenants call and complain that their allergies are acting up because now that the furnace or the AC or something is on and they're blowing air through the vents, well, that air has to pass over the cat and dog hair that's in there, and that same stuff can start causing problems. Well, what if you have to get your vents cleaned out? So ask me how I know. Just kidding on that one. But yes, cleaning vents and stuff like that, you can charge a pet deposit, but please check your state rules on this one here. I know in the state of Missouri we're allowed to do that, but it's good to put that in your qualifications. Here's what we're allowed, this is what it is, but you also need to pay a non-refundable pet deposit or refundable pet deposit. It could be either one of them. It's up to you. We make ours non-refundable, so they end up, there's always going to be additional damage that we have because of pets in some way, shape, or form, whether it be scratches on the door molding that gets scratched for some reason, dogs or cats get excited, things like that. But put those in your ads. So I know I'm kind of beating that to death, but that is a very important thing to put in there because people love their animals. People love their animals like they love their their children, sorry. So please put that in there, and then that will stop a lot of people from calling. Again, you want to answer all of the questions that somebody would have regarding your qualifications so that they don't have to call to get clarity on your qualifications. So, do you charge an application fee? If so, how much? Please put that in there. And please, my goodness, charge an application fee. Okay? If you do not charge an application fee, from my experience, you get less qualified or less quality renter. Because people figure, if I have to pay an application fee and I don't want to pay an application fee, but if it's free, I'll apply. What kind of person are you getting there? What does that say about them? So charge an application fee because you want to make sure that the person understands it. First of all, Application fees are charged everywhere now, for the most part. You can't go apply for a place without having some form of an application fee. And you don't want to process this person's application and run all these reports that you're going to have to pay for, even if it's $10 or $5 a report on some of these online databases, and then be negative. You want their application fee to at least cover their costs so that you're not out negative right from the application process. And then, will you accept housing vouchers from organizations like HUD? So some of the more famous ones are things like Section 8 program, the Section 8 section of HUD's program that deals with subsidized housing for low-income families. So, will you accept those? I don't know if your area has those or if that's something that you even want to deal with, but it's a possibility. And if somebody sees that, they're going to potentially ask, do you accept housing vouchers? So you just need to make sure that you understand what that is and either yes or no and put that in your ad. Okay? So that's kind of like the qualifications I want to go through. These are some of the questions kind of dealing with fair housing, questions not to ask. Okay? So those qualifications, you need to build those to make sure that you have all of those, or use a third-party provider, because those are extremely important to automatically filter out people that don't meet your standards for living in your home. Okay. Now, regarding fair housing, here's some of the things that you don't want to ask ever when people call. So any questions regarding the following should be avoided during tenant screening. You shouldn't be asking them what color they are, where they're from, what national origin, hey, are you from Canada? Are you from South America? Are you from wherever? Don't even bring up, where they're from, even though you're trying to make polite conversation. Just, avoid the topic because you don't want to appear as though you're trying to get the information of where they're from to possibly restrict them from moving in based upon their national origin. So what you see on the screen here are the protected classes by fair housing: color, national origin, disability, familial status, religion, or sexual orientation. Okay. Now, here's one of the things I wanted to make sure I bring this up. These are at a federal level. Okay. These are protected classes at the federal government level. Now, your state, even your local city or municipality, may have additional protective classes. So please, if you're a landlord, check with your state, check with your local municipality to see if there are any other protected classes that you have to be aware of in the local area to make sure that you meet with these. But these are the ones that apply federally to everybody, but then your state or your local city can add to these. Okay, so you want to make sure you know that. But just please, nothing about disabilities. Don't ask about are you pregnant? Do you have any kids? How old are your kids? Nothing like that. You don't want to pry into somebody like that. Again, you can go back to ask them how many people will be living in the unit, but that's a general question. Okay, you're not asking how many adults or children and so forth, but you don't want to hop in and ask those type of questions because it can be discriminatory. Okay. Religion, you don't want to go over religion or even sexual orientation. Now, having said this, this kind of leads right into the next question regarding steering. Okay, steering is, again, it's the practice of guiding prospective residents to certain neighborhoods or areas based upon a protected class. Okay, now I'm going to hop back over here to the protected classes and kind of explain that a little bit. So right now, if you have the opportunity, first of all, you should find or take a fair housing class. I would absolutely have to recommend that. We actually have a fair housing webinar that HUD did that's very good, that can give you information. It's not an official program, but go to the veteranlandlord.com, the welcome area, and there is a fair housing video there from HUD that can give you a lot of good information regarding fair housing. Okay, and their fair housing rules and regulations. But from here, when you're talking with people, even, believe it or not, guys, whenever you're giving directions to places, do not give directions to places and use any of these protected classes as a landmark or anything like that. And here's what I mean. You don't say, to get to the property, you just go down this street here, and as soon as you get to the end of the street, you're going to make a left, and then the house is, down a little bit further on the block. It's right down the street from that Catholic church at the end of the street. Big church, you can't miss it. If you've gotten to the church, that Catholic church, you've gone too far. You need to turn back around. Well, even from you saying that could potentially have the possibility that you're trying to steer people, meaning, oh, there's a Catholic church in this community, so don't rent here unless you're Catholic, or this is a Catholic community. That's the kind of small changes that you can, not changes, I'm sorry, but just small things you could say that could potentially steer people from there, or anything like that. So don't use any landmarks. Don't mention, if you just say grocery store or if you just say church, those things are fine, using those kind of things as a landmark, but just nothing specific, nothing that would identify a religion, if that makes sense. So you can say, hey, there's a car wash here on the corner, make a right. Just try to give as general directions as you can, but try not to steer anybody. Don't put anything in your marketing that would say just things like, hey, this is a senior living community, because what you're telling people is that unless you're older, don't apply. That's kind of steering people, believe it or not, and that could be a discriminatory ad. So you really want to keep it generic when you're doing your marketing, guys. So you don't want to put anything like this in your ad, because people can flag that. I mean, there are like little bots out there that search, and you could potentially get flagged by having an ad out there that's discriminatory. So you just want to make sure that the steering is very important. Again, they talk a lot about this if you ever become a real estate agent, not to steer people toward things. So you don't want to let people know, oh, well, this is a Catholic neighborhood, so if you're Muslim, for instance, then you might not want to live here. You cannot say that, because I don't want to see you potentially get sued in a lawsuit for violating fair housing. Now, again, I haven't really heard of anything like that happening, but you don't even want to have that as a possibility. Okay, so guys, thanks so much for that. That's kind of all I wanted to go through, and just please make sure that you don't violate anything here on fair housing. Take a fair housing class. Good luck on all of your steering, your qualifications. Come up with everything on this list. Watch this video again if you need to, and we just again thank you for being a member of VeteranLandlord.com.